Just a couple of reminders. Again, don't forget to thank your ASL interpreters, the stealth heroes of this event, making it accessible to folks here in the room and those watching remotely and in the future. We're so excited to have you here this morning, and we're really looking forward to this last conversation of the plenaries before we send you off for your afternoons. And we are encouraging you to join us back in this venue at 4:30 this afternoon for the happy hour. It's very happy. Rumor has it the sangria is my own personal recipe, but if you call it Sarah's Sangria, I'm gonna have to charge you a fee. So just like the Pechacucha last night, if you're gonna use the official name, you gotta license it. All right, let's get started. This is an important one, and I wanna make sure everybody's involved. Last call. So thank you, as always, our crowd whisperer. Day 3, last plenary. We heard from transit leaders and riders earlier this week about the perceptions of safety on the system and how it affects their work and behavior. And as Meg Naimi from SEIU 49 reminded us, the need for transit safety can't be siloed from the needs for safety for people walking, rolling, and driving along our streets, especially along our high crash networks. Charlene McGee from Multnomah County Health Department yesterday shared that our most vulnerable street users are disproportionately paying for the lack of safe mobility with their health and with their lives. Few topics are as contentious today as how we address houselessness in Portland and in Oregon. Throw historically heated conversations about public and active transportation into the mix, and it's nearly impossible to wade through the politics and emotions to arrive at actual solutions. Just like the tough conversation we had about how we're going to pay for our transportation system in the future, we need to have courageous and compassionate conversations about how we ensure safety for our most vulnerable system users, regardless of housing status. Few people are as vulnerable to the lack of safe streets as those without housing who spend a majority of their time outside in them. We hope this session this morning is the beginning of a conversation in the right direction, that all of you will engage mindfully and then go forward and lead in your community on this. The Street Trust is honored to partner with Street Roots on events such as Street Day for the 2022 Willamette Week Give Guide and Bike Town for All Reduced Fare program. And we're delighted to welcome to the stage to moderate our discussion, Stephen Gomez, who is an absolute civic gem and longtime friend of the Street Trust, who serves on our Action Fund Board of Directors while simultaneously serving on the board of Street Roots, where he is actively involved in the capital campaign for their new home in Old Town Portland. Thank you, Stephen, for your tireless advocacy in our community and for being here to lead this conversation for us today. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah. I know this group doesn't need any introduction to Street Trust, but and probably many of you that live in Portland, when I say Street Roots, know what Street Roots is about. But for those of you that don't live in Portland and may not have heard about Street Roots, Street Roots is a weekly social justice newspaper sold by persons who are either houseless or living in poverty to earn income. And in fact, Street Roots is one of about 30 street newspapers in America and about 110 or so worldwide. So, you know, whether you live in Portland or not, you've likely probably met a vendor. And if you live in Portland, maybe Tony or Jeremiah are your vendors, but we'll hear from them shortly. As Sarah said, you know, the context for this panel is really, you know, the emerging crisis in the streets, particularly in the last 3 years. And if you haven't seen it already, actually today in the New York Times, they have a lead story on the impacts, particularly of communities of color in transportation. And here in Portland in particular, as she noted, unhoused persons over the last couple of years have been particularly impacted in our roadways. And so that is part of our conversation today, as well as what's happening in our transit systems. So what I'd like to do quickly is get each of our panelists here to introduce themselves. And then my first question for them is, like, how do you typically move around the city?
Hi, I'm Danielle. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the walking programs manager at Oregon Walks. And we are a nonprofit that focuses on pedestrian safety and advocacy. I am lucky to live very central, right near Hawthorne, between Hawthorne and Belmont, so a lot of walking. And then I do rely on my car a lot, but yes, luckily I live in a space that is very walkable. So,
My name is Jeremiah Leggett, and I sell street roots at Hawthorne and 22nd at the Grand Central Bakery in the morning, and then the afternoons over on Northwest 21st in Gleason at the Church of Joe's. And I mostly get around by walking and by transit. As of late, I try to avoid the MAX because it's not very safe.
Good morning, I'm Andrew Plambeck. I'm the Public Affairs Manager at Portland Streetcar, Inc. I'm also a Street Trust Action Fund board member. And I primarily ride my bike to and from the office and with my kids a lot, but use a lot of different modes of transit. Took the streetcar here from the office this morning.
My name's Tony Boone. I sell street roots on the Hawthorne New Seasons. I ride my bike everywhere, and and I took the bus here today because I had to get a babysitter for my dog who cruises around with me on my bike. And that's pretty much I just use transit, walk, or ride my bike.
Thanks, and I would share, it's unfortunate in a sense that Tony had to take transit here because I saw his bike the other day and he's built up his acoustic bike, as people tend to call him, into an e-bike, and it's a pretty cool setup as he tows Wesley, right? Wesley I met the other day, as he tows Wesley around town. Okay, so let's start off with the first question for both Jeremiah and Tony. As we would know, not many people spend as much time, on the streets as newspaper vendors, as street roots newspaper vendors. So, the question is, like, what conditions are you witnessing these days, in particular over the last 3 years, and how has that maybe changed over what you've seen, in prior years? And since you have a mic, Tony, I'll start with you.
Well, for me, it's just avoiding, I have to pay attention to every stop sign, every intersection. I mean, my bike, you see my bike. I mean, it's a convoy. I got a dog in the back. And so, I just see a lot of, I hate to say it, but assholes driving around and ignoring stop signs, ignoring lights, dodging around people. I mean, because on Hawthorne, they changed the whole thing, from 4 lanes to 2 lanes with the middle lane in between. So now I just see people getting mad at other people and beeping and then jumping in that middle lane and shooting around. And, it seems to me that the system out here is very good. The transit sense is great. I mean, the bus system here is awesome. But without the cooperation of the public to go ahead and stop at a stop sign or not, see a yellow light as a punch it, and so that's what I see. I don't see that you can spend millions of dollars on roundabouts unless you teach people how to use a roundabout. Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, it just seems like the education of our drivers is lacking. The screening process needs to be better.
Yeah, I would second that motion for sure. On Hawthorne, though, I would like to say that what PBOT has done by reducing it down has made it significantly safer, especially as somebody who is on the side of the road selling a newspaper. Anytime there's winter conditions, that spot on Hawthorne is notoriously dangerous, and I've watched multiple accidents and watched people come really close to getting hurt badly. And now that divider, was it not divider, but center lane, but it's blocked off too for the crosswalk. And so, that compression of that area has slowed people down and it has made it a lot safer for pedestrians, bicyclists, and anyone. And so I feel like that's a good model. Whoever designed that, that's the way to go. It's much safer now than it was 3 years ago, and that's a fact.
Yeah, and for those of you that live here in Portland, you know that situation on Hawthorne's been contentious, for years, and so we've seen change, and it's good to kind of hear your perspective on that. Before I go to Andrew with a question, we will take questions, as we've been doing in this plenary, from you. So you may already have them on this subject, or also, as you hear our panelists speak, we're going to invite your questions here towards the end. So Andrew, obviously, in the public transit realm, the last couple of years have really seen a lot of change in terms of not just ridership, but safety issues. And Streetcar has done some really innovative things around that, and hoping you can kind of share that with us.
Yeah, I think, I've been at Streetcar for 5 years now, and the pandemic has been really challenging for public transit agencies across the country. And public transit is such a third space, a natural coming together place for your community. And when you're dealing with cascading crises of houselessness and mental health and addiction, people living on the streets, public transit becomes a place where that becomes very visible. And I think especially during the pandemic, when we were seeing, especially at certain times of day or at night, a lot of emptier trains because people weren't going out to do things or coming home from the office, that sort of stuff. An empty streetcar becomes a really convenient place to get out of the rain or sleep or sober up or come down or what have you. And it was, and that can lead to problems in interactions with other riders. It can lead to biohazard issues where you have to take a streetcar out of service to sanitize it. Traditionally, and across the country, public transit agencies' approach is to have security or police just throw somebody off the train. That's the traditional approach of public transit. We wanted to move away from that model in a pretty significant way. So we got the federal government to fund a one-year pilot program where we created a position called Rider Ambassadors. And these are people who have come from diverse backgrounds, but often have at least some volunteer or professional capacity working with vulnerable populations, whether clinical or just at a shower project or what have you. And we hired a team to wear what we think are very kind of non-threatening but still official purple vests, and they carry a backpack that has bottles of water and dry socks and snacks and hygiene products and things like that, street routes resource guides, the Rose City resource. And they are essentially going and looking for people who may be what we'd kind of call riders without destination, and see if we can't help get them connected to services or somewhere warm on a cold night or cool on a really hot day. We think the number was that 1 week really intense heat wave we had last summer. I think we gave out 600 bottles of water. It's been a really successful model. We have had an incredible response from essentially what we would call clients of the program. The anecdotes that have come back have been really incredible, of people who in mental crisis who have been walked and connected with care, people who have fallen out of their continuum of care who have been reconnected with it or with family, people who have been taken to the emergency room who were non-English speakers, who were in a medical crisis, that sort of thing. And it's, we're now in a pivotal spot where we're anticipating statewide transit funding to continue this program for another 2 years. And expand it a little bit. But I will say we've had transit agencies from across the country have been calling us, and I've been meeting with people and their consultants to talk about this exact issue, because cities across the country are dealing with trying to rebuild transit ridership out of the pandemic. And the number one reason in every major American city that people will not ride transit for a trip is perception of safety. So if we can make everyone on the train feel safer and have a more pleasant trip, in a really non-escalating way, I think we're really doing something right and moving in the right direction.
I'd like to ask Andrew a follow-up, and then Tony, you just chime in. But so Andrew, I mean, Portland Streetcar has been, seen as, a national model as a transit-oriented development tool for the last 20 years since it was implemented. But this kind of focus on, a community of care model is new. And I'm wondering, where are you hearing that conversation elsewhere from other transit providers around the country, and what approaches are they taking?
Well, I think a lot of people are trying to figure it out and sort of feeling like they're behind in the conversation. I've spoken recently with Seattle Streetcar or consultants on their behalf. I've spoken recently with a number of other streetcar cities and also the folks who are about to open a streetcar in Orange County. I know LA Metro has just put something like $120 million into a program. They are an ambassador program. They're naming it that too. So there is a real trend, I think, in trying to move away from essentially a policing model to just a community outreach model, giving people a hand and help rather than just kicking them out on the sidewalk. And that's something that it's encouraging that there's a trend seemingly nationally to move in that direction. I think it depends on where you are and what your politics are, whether you can actually implement it. And I was just in another city in a different state that has a streetcar system and transit system, and they had essentially somebody said in front of an audience that people who are homeless want to be that way, and you just have to throw them off the train. And it was I actually flinched because it was very different than the conversations we have in this community.
Tony, you were going to ask or make a comment?
Oh, I was just gonna say about the safety of, there's certain buses I won't go on. And, Jeremiah said the max now. I mean, if you're heading out to Gresham, I wouldn't ride the max out that way. I mean, I don't want to be disparaging to the community, but it's, that's my main driver. I mean, I have my bike, so I'm lucky, but there's other people that don't have a bike, can't ride a bike maybe, that need to take this. And it is, safety is, you're right. When you were saying it, it's exactly the reason I don't go on certain buses. And, I'm lucky. I live in the southeast Portland, and she was mentioning between Belmont and Hawthorne, that's my haunt, and so it's a pretty safe neighborhood as far as that's concerned, but you can, all of a sudden you're just feeling fine, and then you're in a neighborhood where, wow, what happened to this place? It's the same thing I was thinking about Lloyd Center when I got here.
Well, I'll say too, I think that's an important point about transit and being able to feel safe on board public transit is, you mentioned the success of transit-oriented development around the Portland streetcar. 40% of the affordable housing units built in the city of Portland in the last 22 years have been along the streetcar. We have a number of large housing units that are in a dense area and are very specifically senior or disability friendly. And so our ridership is very much majority transit dependent. Survey after survey has shown that people either by choice, because they don't want to own a car, or by economic necessity or by disability, are dependent on the Portland streetcar when they live in the dense development around it. And so, our ability to try to be a little nimble is really rooted in the fact that we have a population we serve that are people who live and work or go to school or do everything along the streetcar route by nature of the neighborhoods that have been built around it. And so we have an obligation to make sure that they feel safe and are having a pleasant ride, no matter what time of day, no matter the trip. And we've gotten for the Rider Ambassador Program, we've heard from a number of riders effusively about how great it was to see more people on board transit that aren't just the operator who has a very specific job to do, but also to see sort of a compassionate approach taken with someone maybe they would get off and they would have worried about or thought about the rest of the day. So that's been really encouraging as well.
Question for Danielle. So our roadways and our streets have really, become the intersection of some of, the biggest, public health and safety issues that not just Portland is facing, but really around the country, particularly homelessness and addiction. And as we talked about earlier, we're seeing where unhoused people are particularly impacted, in our roadways. So just wondering, how Oregon Walks thinks about, safety, public safety policy investments, and particularly how it affects our vulnerable users of our various systems.
Well, one thing we've talked about a lot at Oregon Walks is just this necessity to include people in the conversation who are experiencing houselessness. And I've been fortunate to sit on committees and review applications from different jurisdictions that talk about community engagement, but community engagement can't come after a project is already decided or going to go through. So conversations with people who are experiencing houselessness right now, like from the very, very beginning, is just essential in making sure that we address the issue. Oregon Walks has also talked about this need for a fatal crash review committee, because yes, we can see statistics about, like, there's been less people since banning people camping on the high crash corridors, but that is so nuanced. Just because you're taking away, like, it just causes more and more trauma. Just because less people are dying because they're not getting hit there, they could be dying because you swept them for a different reason. Like, it's so nuanced. And so having some kind of fatal crash review committee that's public and private, and that jurisdictions get to talk with people, and people within nonprofits and who are experiencing houselessness, and figure out the root causes of why, like, it's so dangerous to be in the roads. And then lastly, kind of just going off what other people said, but our real need to focus, like, radically on systemically changing and reimagining our streets rather than perfecting the behavior of individuals who are using the streets. Yeah.
And, a follow-up question for you. So access to the right-of-way is recently in Portland spilled out into a lawsuit around ADA access to the streets. And wondering, how Oregon Walks thinks about that holistically, because there are as many unhoused people as housed people that have disability issues in terms of mobility.
Yes, and this is something we've talked about a lot too. Again, incredibly nuanced. It's not a black and white answer about just like, part of me is nervous. I have so many thoughts and feelings about all of this. But basically, yeah, there's so many houseless people are disabled. And by taking away, basically tents and people on the street have just been used as a scapegoat for the actual infrastructure changes that are needed. And on the other side, it is really difficult, like, on the way to get things done to improve access and accessibility for disabled people is, like, often a lawsuit rather than it being something that's thought about at the very beginning. And so, yeah, not black and white. It's really, there can't be a contested space over the right of way. It's just as important to focus on what people who are experiencing houseless need on the streets, what's going to make people safer, in addition to, like, anyone traveling on the streets.
Jeremiah, it's a question for you. I noticed you nodding your head as Danielle was speaking here, particularly about this issue of access, whether because of the ADA lawsuit or not. What's going on in your head on that one?
Yeah, I mean, because lawsuits are pretty much what moves things forward and gets people to change, which is kind of frustrating that this political system is set up in such a way, because it slows down progress. It focuses more on, I don't know, penalizing people who can't really afford to be penalized, so it doesn't make much sense.
Great. This is a follow-up question both for Tony and Jeremiah. After hearing, about programs and some policy solutions that both Andrew and Danielle have talked about, what are the kinds of things that would make a difference for you in your day in both terms of safety and mobility as you get around the city? And Tony, maybe we'll start with you.
I don't know if I can do anything to improve my safety other than what I do. I pay attention. I mean, when I'm riding my bike around, I'm always looking. Even when I hit a green light, I stop and slow down to make sure that the other people notice that their light is red. And Yeah, and as far as houselessness is concerned, I don't know if there's any engineers in here that can figure out how many studio apartments you could put in this place, but it seems like a lot.
Yeah, I mean, as far as safety goes, like the ambassador program helps with the max, but there's just so much outrageous drug use right now on the max, and it's not just during the nighttime, it's round the clock. And it's ridiculous. I got a nice big old scar on my chest where I got stabbed, got my main artery severed, lung collapsed, a little over a year ago on the max. And the day after, someone got shot on the max. So, you know, it is what it is, you know, but I feel like safety could improve.
So as a follow-up to that, Andrew talked about their ambassador program, which, by the way, probably folks here in Portland would know. To some degree, that program is modeled after Portland Street Response, which is a program that modeled on a program in Eugene called Cahoots that Street Roots advocated for, and is an alternative to a police response to a person having a mental health or behavioral health crisis. And the question I have is, having heard about that on Portland Streetcar, do you feel like a program like that could be meaningful in terms of safety in TriMet buses? And
So TriMet does have that program, and they are doing that. They just need to increase it. You know, when they don't have enough people to cover the trains, and the problem is so bad because we don't have safe places for people to go actually do what they're doing. And that's why I had the question I did yesterday, because enough is enough. We know how to fix this problem.
I think TriMet is doubling their team as well right now. So we're hiring and expanding, and they're also, I think they're making a big expansion of that program on the max. So.
what is your typical coverage rate?
It's been a little lower now. We've had a little turnover, and we were waiting to see if we were going to get that state funding to continue the program, and now we are. So I just came from doing an interview, and I'm doing 5 tomorrow. So if anybody knows anyone and wants to send them my way very quickly, we are trying to staff back up to. We work in pairs, and so with a little bit of crossover, you know, we have a pretty geographically small system. We do have usually at least one pair out during certain hours, and sometimes a little overlap with 2 pairs out, in addition to City of Portland operations supervisors who can respond to things and enforce city code and do all sorts of other activities. And then the City of Portland also has some code enforcement officers that's usually about 1 on shift at a time, but they're usually responding to very, very specific problems or something needing an immediate code enforcement response.
We have time for questions. I don't know if we've gotten written ones at this point, but if not, Sarah, could we just take questions from the audience? Be happy to do that.
While we get there, I want to just what Jeremiah had said too is, you know, there's a room full of multimodal transportation activists and urbanists and things, and we're familiar with the idea of activating public spaces and the safety and security that comes with having eyes on the street and that sort of thing. And I think transit is absolutely no different in that way. And when you have active transit vehicles filled with people, it becomes a lot less of a convenient place to do drugs or to engage in any sort of illegal activity, things like that. And so the safety in numbers of transit ridership is very, very much important. And I think one thing we've learned I also manage a team of customer service representatives who just ride, and they're the concierge of the streetcar, helping people find their way, giving directions, giving stickers to kids, what have you. Any sort of onboard presence in addition to the operator is a plus. Just having somebody who looks somewhat official on a transit vehicle, who's watching what's happening inside the vehicle while the operator is looking out and trying to operate safely is an absolute benefit to every other rider on board.
Thanks for sharing that. Oh, we have a question over here.
I live in North Portland, and I would not take the bus or the MAX line And the shelters, that's what is a big stopper for me. They're so dirty and run down, and the glass gets broken. The trash cans are always overflowing. I mean, it's just not something that I want to wait for a bus at. And I find it just the risk to me. I would prefer to drive myself because I feel safer, even though there's the potential of a car crash. But for the reasons that Tony stated too, and Jeremiah, it doesn't feel safe.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm going to stop here and then I'll come back to you. Here you go, Mary.
Hi, this is Mary Lee, and I'm a longtime bus user. I'm blind and can't run as fast as I used to, and I am increasingly anxious about and I use Max a lot to get out to Gresham. I'm increasingly concerned about the disruptions I hear on buses and Max, people who are obviously having a mental health concern, but then I get off the bus and I have to cross streets, and one of the gentlemen that was speaking was talking about how people run traffic lights, and that is, I want to be a part of reducing that. You can't just slap their hands because I'd have to catch them first, but I do feel increasingly vulnerable as a blind pedestrian, but I'm not going to quit. So anyway, thank you all for what you do. And I've been invited to buy the newspaper many times, and unfortunately I can't read it, but what I'll do at least is pay for it even if I can't read it. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing your experience, Mary.
Hey all, a little bit of a shift of gears. I work in a lot of communities, smaller towns around like Salem and Corvallis and whatnot. And one of the things we work on a lot increasingly is trying to get bike and pedestrian paths in towns and between towns increasingly, because there's some more funding for that now. So I wondered, I hear a lot about lighting. There's a lot of concerns about safety with the paths that we're trying to build. There's perception. I think a lot of it's filtering out of Portland, unfortunately, that those paths will inevitably attract unsavory behavior and things. And so, so it's a tough one, but I think it has a lot of potential to make a really big difference in some small communities. So I wondered if you've been talking a lot about transit. I wondered if you had any suggestions or observations about those separated paths for the rest of us that are kind of working on those types of projects.
So like Springwater, I-205, multi-use path, things like that.
Well, I like the greenways that they have. I take the bike paths. They're they have bumps in them, so people can't just fly through, and it's really, every once in a while you'll get some guy beeping at you, get out of my way, and then you got to point out to him that, well, you should be on a street that isn't a greenway, and you wouldn't have me in your way. And so those are great, but I don't know about the rest of the city. I just only know really southeast Portland, and then there's plenty, and that's what I do. When I ride my bike, I almost exclusively go to a greenway because it's safer.
But I think speaking to the advocacy side of that, that's a tale as old as time. It's a NIMBYistic response that my dad used to tell me about when Tom McCall ran for governor the third time and lost to Vic Atiyeh in the primary. He was pitching the Willamette River Greenway, the idea that from Portland to Eugene, you'd have an unbroken public access to the Willamette River. And there were people coming out of the woodworks who owned farms or property along the river and said, well, no, I'm gonna have people camping on my damn land. And it was, so that's, 40 years ago. And you still hear those things when you start trying to put in new infrastructure to make it easier for people to access safe, active transportation. I don't know how far you can get convincing people who don't want to see that change regardless. And I realize that's not a great answer, but it's real. It is.
Yeah, add some perspective, and that is, I think there's no doubt that here in Portland, particularly along the Springwater corridor, for now a number of years, there's been user conflict, as we sometimes euphemistically like to call it. And so I think we always have to say, like, safety for whom, right? So we all want everybody to be safe, but we have to think about, like, why are unhoused people choosing to live along our multi-use paths? And because that is relatively safer than other options that they have. And that is not to condone it, but to just underscore that unhoused people have way fewer options usually than those of us that are housed. And long-term, in a place like Portland where we have a significant unhoused population, and it's not just Portland, as we well know. I mean, I spent time in Bend, and Bend has a very significant houseless population. The only real solution is housing for people that are unhoused and live, having to choose the least worst option in terms of, where they live. So maybe not the answer that folks want to hear. And in reality, our city anyhow is choosing to increasingly sweep those folks. And of course, they just move from one place to the other. So that's not a real solution.
Other questions?
There's questions in the back.
Get my steps in today, yeah.
I just want to thank Danielle, is that your name, for calling out the connection between transportation safety improvements and scapegoating unhoused folks who are living along those corridors, oftentimes kind of using it as a Trojan horse to move them somewhere else. I live in Eugene, I live in the Whitaker. If anyone is familiar with the Whitaker, you'll know that we're experiencing a lot of the same problems, very much focused in that area. There's a park called Washington Jefferson where a lot of folks were living for a really long time. They're moved en masse, to that somewhere else magical place, wherever that is. I still don't know, except it was, along other places more out of the public eye, which of course, I think someone up here mentioned, like, just because they're not living where they were camping beforehand does not mean that they're now immune to danger. It's just danger somewhere else. So I just wanted to thank you for calling that out.
Thanks for sharing that.
I can say something about that. I mean, when, I live on the street, I live in my van, so I'm lucky. But I see the sweeps. Every time there's a sweep, I start seeing new people that I've never seen before in the neighborhood that I'm hanging out with. So you're right, it's just whack-a-mole. They're not, they're not putting anybody in a house. They're just moving them to your neighborhood or somebody else's neighborhood.
Hi, I'm Xavier, host of Greater Portland on Portland Radio Project. I just wanted to comment on one of the panelists mentioning the fact that more riders on a transit vehicle inherently makes it more safer. There are more eyes, there's a little bit more activation. And I think to that point, it's important to bring into the discussion, and I'd maybe like to get a little feedback about the idea of, like, making transit a little bit more feasible as a riding option would go towards making safety better. In fact, the ridership on the MAX system peaked in 2009 with the opening of the Green Line, and you may notice that we've opened in a whole new line since that point and never got to that peak of ridership. In order for people to want to take transit, it has to be incentivized. You can't be stopping every block. You can't be, limiting speeds to 12 miles an hour through the downtown. It has to be something that is attractive and feasible in terms and desirable in terms of your daily schedule. So I think it's important, even though the narrative around safety is being used to kind of poo-poo transit as a reasonable transportation option moving forward in our planning, that the safety will be solved in conjunction with making it a better vehicle, making it a better mode share, making it a better choice for most people. So we're kind of in a negative feedback loop in terms of the reputation of transit, but I think investing not just in this idea of safety, but in making it actually faster and more reliable would go a long way towards improving safety and the such.
Yeah, I think, specifically focusing on aspects related to safety don't preclude working on other improvements. And we've put in on the Portland streetcar system an immense amount of signal and lane priority across our system, which has been very successful in terms of establishing greater reliability and fewer delays. We've just accepted one new vehicle and we're waiting for its two siblings. And then this summer we'll be able to add greater frequency on the east side. So we're continuing to try to work to improve all aspects of the rider experience. We are getting new screens put in at hopefully all our stops once we can get all the rest of them, actually all of the hardware, that'll hopefully provide greater reliability in the arrivals prediction system and allow us to provide a greater variety of rider communication when something's happening and more specifics about what riders can expect. We're currently also working on turning over from the kind of nasty cloth upholstery seats on board all of our vehicles to a non-porous, easy to clean vinyl. So, I mean, the point's well taken. You have to be striving to make your travel mode, whatever that may be, a competitive option against the others. And that's something that we take very seriously and are constantly trying to work on.
I just have to comment here. This is not on the panel topic per se, but I grew up in New York City as a kid. And I'm a little bit older than the other panelists here. And when you mentioned about the seats, subways in New York had wicker seats back in the 50s and 60s. And when they weren't well kept, then they started sticking into you. So the evolution of seating in transit's been really important.
Hi, I'm Annie. I'm a graduate student at the University of Oregon, interested in transportation. I'm really curious about your drivers, your bus drivers, and interactions with bus drivers as you're talking about safety, what their stories are, training that you're doing, especially around this narrative of safety, because I'm sure they're seeing a lot, but also stepping in or having stories around these safety interactions on the buses.
So I would just work for Portland Streetcar, not TriMet, so I can't speak for TriMet and for bus operators, but our operators are TriMet union, ATU union members, and all of them used to drive a MAX train. And it's a well-documented experience now, in the last couple of years, that assaults on transit operators are up significantly to historic levels. Our operators prior to the pandemic, had a personal choice of whether to operate with their cab door open or closed. Some of them just wanted to get in there and drive the streetcar. Others really enjoyed the hybrid, having come from MAX where the cab door is closed. They enjoyed being able to interact with folks, answer questions and things like that. When the pandemic hit, for health and safety reasons, we had all operators keep the cab door closed. And because of a few interactions in the last year or so, our safety committee and our ODOT state safety oversight have approved as a hazard mitigation that the standard operating procedure is to operate with the cab door closed at all times. So that's not a holistic region-wide multi-mode transit experience, but that is our experience at Portland Streetcar.
Hi. I just want to say I've really appreciated hearing your stories and just hearing your experiences on our streets. And I'm really curious about how public agencies and street advocates can bring you into the conversation about the future of transportation. I know we've heard a lot of great conversations about what TriMet's doing to meet you where you're at, but in terms of being more proactive with engaging with the homeless community, what can we do? And yeah, I'm just curious to hear more about that. Thanks.
I don't know if I understand the question. I think what you're saying is how you could be more active in reaching out to the homeless community. Just do it. Food, socks, Just saying hi to somebody, you know, I mean, we experience the one, I don't want to call it, it's bigotry. It's because, we're seen, we're not black. I mean, well, I'm a white guy, so I can get away with more than most, I guess, but you're automatically seen in the light of the last asshole that they ran into, the guy that was yelling at you and screaming at you and was having or there's tons of thieves. And like Jeremiah said, I mean, the drug use is, I see it every day. They walk, well, ever since they decriminalized meth, I mean, they just walk around with their pipes hanging. I mean, tinfoil's in their hand, walking into the store, grabbing a soda and walking out and then hitting the tinfoil. You're not going to do anything about that guy, but there is tons of us out there that aren't that guy. And it's really hard to be seen in the eyes of that guy. And tons of people do it. And I'm not saying that they're bigots, but I was hearing a conversation the other day. There's 5 people sitting around at Stumptown at the picnic tables talking all kinds of smack about homeless people. And if they were using the N-word or calling Mexicans out of their name, somebody would have said, one of those 5 people would have said something. But they all were like, yeah, these guys outside of my door throwing garbage all over the place. That's a minority of the homeless people. The people like me, you don't even really see me except, if you know I'm homeless, but don't see somebody who's homeless and think, oh, that guy's a tweaker or that guy's a thief, and maybe, just say, hey, how you doing? You want some food? I mean, for me, I live on food stamps, so hot food is something that I don't enjoy that much all the time, so I'm usually eating sandwiches or prepared foods or something that I can throw in a microwave. So yeah, nice hot dish would be great.
Yeah, I'll say from an institutional perspective, we see the other side of that that coin, which is we put our rider ambassadors in purple vests. We wanted it to be as approachable a color as possible, not neon yellow where it looks like they're about to respond to an emergency. And we still have them, they get on a streetcar and they see somebody see them and pop right off at the other door because they assume they're fare enforcement. And I think there are people who've been living on the streets for a while who are just so used to being hassled everywhere they go that if you can take a different approach, you can get far. And like Tony said, a bite to eat, a pair of dry socks on a wet day, it'll get you a long ways.
It's not just engagement too. There's some real severe holes in the safety nets. There's a lady that's in her mid-70s who's been homeless up on Northwest 21st in Gleason area for well over 10 years. And this lady's in a freaking wheelchair. And for some reason, nobody can seem to fix this problem. They let her out of the hospital last Saturday, and I had to go to the Street Roots office so that she could have a tarp and a blanket because they kicked her out of the hospital with nothing but a sleeping bag in her wheelchair. And this lady's in her 70s. That until we start actually fixing our safety nets so that they actually take care of the most vulnerable people, I refuse to be a part of the city shelter systems because I can't stand being around drug addicts. I got off heroin over 19 years ago, and I'm not really interested in hanging out with junkies anymore. Not my thing. And that's what the shelter system is. And it's gross, it's disgusting. There's bugs everywhere. It's just disgusting. I would rather camp in a park and have for 8 years. I pack up and clean up every morning, and the rangers all know me on a first name basis. But I'm the exception to the rule. There's a lot of people that can't do that. And the fact that these people are just allowed to just be on the street with no help is ridiculous.
I would also add that we are in a place right now in which technology is amazing and there's a lot of ways to access people and share information. But and there is a lot of issues with cooling, warming, shelters, etc. But when the only way that information is being shared is through Instagram, you're not going to reach your audiences. So it doesn't matter if the bus is free to get to a cooling center. because no one knows how to get to that cooling center. Last summer, I drove around just asking people if they knew how to get there, and they're like, no. And so it was just like writing on pen and paper, like directions to different cooling centers when it was like 115 degrees out. And so it has to be just like reconnecting on a very human basis and not on Instagram and sharing things. But yeah, like really being on the ground where people live and making sure they have access to the things that are being shared.
Any other questions out there? I
got
would
one
also,
more in the back.
there's one back there. The Street Trust, as mentioned earlier, has become a good partner for Street Roots and has helped Street Roots vendors get access to Bike Town for All passes, as well as transit wallets. So, that's a small thing in a way, but it's also, I think part of, this conversation, which is, and, I think what Tony really was saying, seeing people that are unhoused as people, as parts of the community, and then acting to support them in whatever way you can.
All right, I've got a question. We've been talking about transit a lot. One of the sessions yesterday, Multnomah County was talking about our disturbing vulnerable user fatality trends in the Portland metro area, and the realization that 1 in 3 of our pedestrian fatalities in Multnomah County has been a person experiencing homelessness. And there was a discussion about, well, some of that's just more constant exposure to traffic when you're living on the street. But there wasn't a discussion about what can we do about it. Clearly, providing places for people to live is one solution, but that stat has also been used as a justification for sweeps on more high traffic corridors and putting giant boulders in different areas along interstates. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are. What would be helpful for pedestrian safety from your perspectives?
Great question.
I feel like what the city's been doing on Division and Hawthorne is the way to go. Reduce the lanes, reduce the speed, make more space for everyone. It's slowing down is the biggest thing. Things happen so quickly. I mean, even yesterday, while I was at Trader Joe's, somebody seized out, hit the gas, and came flying out of the parking lot and ran into 2 parked cars. Like, that's just how life happens, really quick. So just slowing it down makes a big difference. A lot less damage gets done.
Any other folks want to comment on that? Because I do think this is a key issue, even Danielle, do you guys have any thoughts along the high crash corridors, especially any short-term stuff you're recommending? Didn't mean to hijack your conversation there, Stephen, but.
Yeah, I'll just go back to a little bit, like part of why we've been talking about kind of a fatal crash review committee is instead of depending on data and stats that are really hard to come by and are just put out in articles, like you said, to justify sweeps and saying like, well, I banned camping on high crash corridors. That's why no one's dying anymore, which is just like, where is that data? Like having really public data. We're working with a Masters of Public Health candidate right now at Oregon Walks who's looking at basically where pedestrian fatalities are happening in accordance with sweeps. And by having a really public process where you're coming back and being like, okay, what was the reason behind this? How do we not get this happening again? And just like honestly starting to track things better is kind of a first step around a lot of it. Yeah.
I just, again, from maybe more of a Street Roots board member perspective, people are living unhoused along high crash corridors or, the freeways because those are less likely areas to get swept but they will get swept, right, ultimately. And as someone said here before, it's just whack-a-mole. And so I don't know, I don't know that I or we, Street Roots per se, have any other like long-term solution other than we eventually have to get, people housed. And to think that this housing crisis is going to be resolved in the next couple of years, it's not. But in the meanwhile, there are other kind of paths along the way to help all of us be safe in the community. And I just, would say, kudos to Portland to Portland Streetcar for their approach, which really matters. And we need more of those kind of empathetic and supportive programs, throughout our communities.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone for being here today on our panel. Can we get a round of applause?
That one. And I want to personally thank Tony and Jeremiah, and I'm just going to put a plug in for Street Roots. So first of all, we are streetroots.org. If you live here in Portland, find your vendor, buy the paper, tip that person. And also, as Sarah mentioned earlier, Street Roots is going to relocate to a new home. We bought a building on the corner of 3rd and Burnside, which is now undergoing a major renovation. It's going to allow us to expand our programs so that we better help and support our vendors. And we have a capital campaign going on right now. It's an $8 million capital campaign. We have raised $6.2 million. And every dollar matters. So if you want to go to streetroots.org, you'll find all about our campaign, and would really appreciate if you could contribute whatever you would. Thank you.
Thanks again. Yeah, and definitely, there's papers up here for sale, right? So get your copy. Move into action, people, right? And so for those of you who work inside agencies, I will tell you from the nonprofit side, that food piece is not insignificant. Fund everybody who you're asking to engage any vulnerable population to put hot meals in front of the public. We oftentimes get funded for like a reflective gear, and then we fundraise on our own for things like hot meals and whatnot. So if you actually care about communicating with anyone, not just someone experiencing houselessness, working families, parents, young people, fund food, buy food, be generous with the food. I'm sorry we're not. We're saving money for people out here, but don't be like us. Do better than us. And then I will also say this. Take forward good messaging like Claire suggested with regard to the data, and lead good discussions in your communities like this one so that we can decouple a lot of the biases and assumptions and negative perceptions and have real conversations about things like street lighting that serves everyone, safe sidewalks and safe crossings that serve everyone, rubbish containers that serve everyone. We all have trash, right? How do we make sure that our streets are clean and safe for everyone? Because when they're clean and safe for our most vulnerable users, then we're all gonna benefit. So that's my 2 cents at the end of this conversation. We'll see you in your sessions all afternoon. Thanks for being here. Make sure you come to the happy hour. Thank the Street Trust staff and board members here today who pulled this all together for us. And we'll see you back here at 4:30, 4:45 this afternoon. Thanks again, everyone.
Preacher man.